Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of our digital health programming. I am Catherine Pugh, Senior Manager of Digital Health at the Consumer Technology Association, and we're so glad you could join us this morning. We are looking forward to our second day of programming, diving into some of the most exciting trends in the healthcare industry. And also, don't forget today at 4:30 in LVCC N259, which is right down at the end of this hall, we will host our first ever digital health mixer. Our first panel today, sponsored by BCG, will address an unparalleled health tech partnering opportunity. Please join me in welcoming Nate Bayer, Managing Director and Partner at BCG, to lead this discussion.
Thank you. Thank you all for arriving here at 9 a.m. on a Saturday in Las Vegas. My name's Nate. I'm a Managing Director Partner out of our San Diego office at the Boston Consulting Group. I lead our health tech initiative at BCG. And I'm really excited to talk to this group today about the opportunities for partnering in health tech and what's special about right now entering 2023. I mean, we all know partnering's good generally in healthcare and beyond, but I want to talk about right now what's special, the complexities associated with it, and the links to strategy. We've got an industry where there's been just mountains of capital poured in over the last few years, which has obviously tapered off in the last year. You've got, because of that, more talent. You've got stronger products. You've got big companies that are increasingly realizing that they can rely on this ecosystem more and more. So I really think that this is a very unique time. And with that, I'd love to just have our panelists do quick intros and name, company, title, but I also want to hear who are your natural ecosystem partners and the value you're trying to create with them.
Great, thank you, Nate. Thanks for having us. My name is Sanskriti Thakur. I am the Chief Growth Officer of Medable. It is a digital clinical trials platform. We exist to accelerate medicine for patients, and because of this patient journey and the need to develop drugs, our ecosystem partners are pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, data partners, clinical sites, hospital systems, retail pharmacies, any of those who play a role in bringing medicines and treatments to patients.
I'm Dave Matthews, the Chief Growth Officer at Bright Insight, and we're a platform and products company focused on delivering digital solutions for patients, providers, and laboratory technicians to really holistically manage their diseases, really through the commercial launch of products. So we naturally focus on a very similar set of really partners, starting with pharma and med tech, and then moving through the pharmacy channels, the EHR integrations with hospital systems really globally, and really a range of partners for data.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kapil Parak. I'm a cardiologist. I'm at Google. I work on Fitbit. And our partners are a whole range of folks. So we partner with insurance companies, with governments like the NHS in the UK, hospital systems, pharma, and so on. And our group's really focused on trying to find health use cases for a consumer device.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ed Cox. I am the head and GM of digital health and medicine at Pfizer. And what's cool is examples of partners of who we have is literally everybody on this stage, like actually all of them. And that's kind of amazing. That wasn't by design, but it's a good example in that whether or not you're thinking about clinical trials, whether or not you're thinking about go-to-market, whether or not you're thinking about wearables, whether or not you're thinking about strategy. And so I think the cool thing about health, specifically digital health, is it's so multifactorial. There's so many dynamics going on all at the same time that the definition of what partner could be is quite broad, and that's a good thing.
Thanks. That was a nice segue for the innovation hypothesis that I want to start this discussion with. Often when we think about disruption, we think about a single actor, Uber transforming the taxi industry. But the hypothesis here is that disruption in healthcare will not happen alone. Disruptive solutions require partnerships. They require a team effort. To even deliver a single solution, it will require multiple players coming together. I'd like each of us to reflect on that. Thoughts?
It's a big question.
the thesis.
Yes, of course. Look, I exist in the world of making medicine, and only 3% of people actually get involved in clinical trials. So we're making medicines for very few people, actually, from a profile perspective. Part of that reason is historically, you know, a person has to go to an investigator or their doctor and be enrolled to be a part of making of science. And that doesn't work, actually, right? I totally agree with you, Nate. We have an ecosystem of partners that bring access to medicine, and it requires all those various points that touch a patient or a to-be patient. Heartily agree.
Very similar. So in our business, we see one of the biggest challenges being managing the holistic patient journey, right? And so from before the patient even knows that they have a condition, all the way through to managing therapy switching, managing end of life even. And that whole journey requires so many players along the way to deliver value and to deliver solutions, digital interventions and others, but largely digital, to give that holistic experience. We find that to deliver that, it's actually impossible for a single player, right? To your point, Nate, so I would fully agree. And in fact, last year we started the Bright Insight ecosystem, which was an explicit recognition of this fact that you can't do it alone. So we've brought in formal partners across many of kind of best of breed solutions in order to plug in across the patient journey.
I'll just push back a little bit, just so that I'm not the third yes in a row. You know, I think if you look at other industries, it's not like a single player completely disrupted them on their own, right? Like if you look at Google Maps, for example, leading sort of mapping solution, and yet there's others. First of all, it's sort of built upon, you know, right from the beginning of like GPS technology that the government built up and all of this stuff, and then other players that have also contributed to sort of those technologies over time. And you can take that example for just about any field. But that said, you know, just like those industries where partnership is important, this is also one of those where partnership is going to be important. And I think it's part of Google's DNA. So if you look at Android, if you look at any of the other sort of offerings that Google has, it is very much about building an ecosystem and collaborating. And so I think this is going to be no different.
Yeah, and I think it's fairly obvious is that the complexities within health are orders of magnitude more than so many other fields. You know, in other words, we're not even saying these are the ways that this works across health. We're saying this is how this works across this specific therapeutic area. But then if you go to a different therapeutic area, it works completely differently. And so even a pharmaceutical company, you know, the idea that there are many pharmaceutical companies that have radically different modalities, like you know, two regulated pharmacological products. One could be a pill, and one could be, you know, in an infusion center. And if you think about all the steps, all the people involved, all the advocates and the patients and the stakeholders and the caregivers, in each of those journeys they're different. And so it's almost like a three-dimensional matrix. And so if the only way to really truly care for a person requires dozens of stakeholders per therapeutic area, you know, partnership is mandatory. But I also think that's exciting because, like, you know, we're in a field where people are in this field to help people, and that's very aspirational.
So, Ed, back to you on that one, because I think everything you said is true now and has been true in healthcare for quite a while. What's special about right now in health tech that leads to more opportunity or different opportunity when it comes to partnering?
Yeah, and it's a great question. So, and you know, this is kind of a way to think about it, about what has changed, is a proxy for how much the world has changed related to connectivity is the percentage of grandparents that could use Zoom in January of 2020 to January of like 2022. So my guess is if someone actually did that math, it's going to be like 0.07 in January of 2020 and like 70% in January of 22. So that's like 5 orders of magnitude or something.
Gonna find that stat on ChatGPT.
Yeah, like somebody can figure this out, right? But it's like it's a lot, right? It's not we're big shifts, and so the idea that all of a sudden, another example, we have trained almost the entire world on how to do a fairly complex, multi-step, at-home diagnostic. Over and over and over and over again, right? And because of like companies like Abbott, like some of it was even connected. But the idea that like millions, hundreds of millions of people now know how to do an at-home diagnostic, that's new. It's a silly thing, but it's true. The bandwidth we now have, because now everyone wants to watch, or over the pandemic, everybody wanted to watch Game of Thrones on their phone, right? And so now we have like super highways in the sky. And so if you think about all those things, it's a confluence of events. Tragically, many of those things were accelerated by the pandemic, but this is a real change. Like we know it's a change, whether it be telehealth that we're seeing radically change, whether or not we see how patients are talking about things, even conversations that we're willing to have now. The number of meetings that we have over Zoom or Teams or Google, you are seeing these permanent changes that did not exist in 2019 that are there now. And all of those are either applicable to health tech or health tech themselves. And I think that that's thrilling because, I mean, you know, this was not a guarantee. We could have done this for another 100 years and never have a moment that like everyone all of a sudden says, oh my gosh, I could be in my home and still be cared for. Or I could be on my phone and still be cared for. And yet now everybody thinks that.
It's interesting because I think you brought up a lot of different, you know, logos, for lack of a better word, even just in what you just described. When you think about partnerships and from a technology perspective and all these different logos, how does the answer change in terms of, you know, the scalability of the solution you can deliver based on how many you bring together, different types of technologies you bring together or don't?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it goes off of the momentum of really breaking a mindset that we couldn't do this in healthcare. Because the first step to getting the right partners is that they believe they have a place in this role that health technology has now. You know, the 2 years ago world that we lived in with COVID when patients were at home, that is when we truly learned from a drug development perspective, how do we bring vaccines to those people, right, when they're at home? And so at Medable, our solution is dependent upon partnerships with services, nurses, home health care that go into homes and manage patients remotely. It's dependent upon our relationships with mobile technologies that we leverage as a platform to be in front of patients every day. It's dependent upon the sponsors of clinical trials to change the way they've been doing and making medicine for hundreds of years immediately, overnight. And we rely on them to rethink how they do that sustainably with us. We rely on retail pharmacies. We've partnered with retail pharmacies because we know communities are where you can treat chronic disease, are where you can bring individuals who don't even know that they may be in a position to be a part of investigational research into the fold. And of course, all of this isn't valuable unless we can scale it, and that requires data partners so that we can be smarter, so that we have transparency into the decisions that we make across the platform. Because what is it except for getting the clinical outcome, getting the right endpoint, getting the patient healthier? And that requires the monitoring, tracking of data. So, of course, the providers are in there. I just named 6 or 7, I would say, actual entities that have to engage on the Medable platform to run a clinical trial.
Right, and only one of them was a customer, actually.
Only one.
Well, and it's interesting because I think you called out the fragmentation that you know, Ed, you were saying was true for all along, but also said, hey, to stitch all this together, we actually need the tech, we need the data to flow. Kapil, can you comment on, you know, right now, what's different from a tech perspective that wasn't true 24 months ago? And we've talked a bit about adoption, so I don't necessarily want to hammer this point of COVID adoption, but you know, beyond that, what's different right now?
I mean, like Ed pointed out, the bandwidth changes that have happened, the changes in computation are quite remarkable. So Google's a leader in machine learning and AI, and if you look at what we've done with images in breast cancer screening, in other kinds of image processing, there's papers in Nature and others that you can look at, diabetic retinopathy and so on. These machine learning models are creating really incredible insights around, sort of previously unanalyzable data, right? Like, so if you think about, before it would take someone like me looking at an ECG to understand what it means and interpret that and do something with it for a patient, and now a machine can actually look at an image instead of a radiologist. And I want to emphasize that these are not things that, the big headline you get from that is, oh, they'll replace doctors and we'll all be out of a job. I think that's kind of a little exaggerated. I think what these can have the potential to do is really augment clinicians so they're practicing at the top of their license and allow these services to reach those places where there isn't a doctor available or not one readily available and things like that. So there's an equity play as well. So lots of advancement in actual technology itself too.
What are the architectural implications to what you just said? I mean, increasingly, I'm embracing architecture as a strategic question as opposed to just like a purely executional one. I kind of want you to comment on this one, actually, Dave. In terms of, we've got more compute, we've got more need for data. The fragmentation is persistent. But when we think about architecture, how does that link back to strategic questions, or what are the types of choices in front of us as we think about that?
I mean, it's a really complex one, and as you say, it's not just what's the tech stack. It's also strategically, who are the players, where do they fit in that stack, how do they play together? One of the things that we see is that question actually operates at a couple of levels, right? So in our case, right, we have a fully globally compliant infrastructure that allows for Class 3 regulated medical devices as software to be deployed across 64 countries right today and growing. And that's a critical component part. We also have solutions that can sit on top of that, and that allows for things like speed, right? And I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit. But it also allows for interoperability, right? And so when you think about data, when you think about other digital solutions that would take advantage of microservices and APIs that would live within our infrastructure, within Medible's infrastructure, within any number, would pull in algorithms and inputs from mammography and actually allow for that to be used. I think of one case for us at Sanofi where we're the underlying infrastructure for one of their blockbuster drugs to be launched a little bit later this year. And there are, I think, something like 12 other players who are plugging in and plugging out, so to speak, into our infrastructure. Ours is the core layer, but there's a necessary kind of organization of all those component parts in order to achieve the objective. And then the question is, well, is the pharma player the one who does that coordination? Is it the tech player?
Is it BCG?
Is it BCG? And so I think there's a good case for many, but it actually operates, so for BCG's example, strategically thinking through what will that deployment look like. But at the platform and solutions layer, the core platform might be and there is actually room for both, right? It's almost a hybrid best of best is what we've seen work best.
I would have to agree with that. I mean, now that we're scaling across biopharma, there's about 8,000, clinical trials available to deliver to patients. That's the majority of them over the next 3 years. And as biopharma adopts at the enterprise level, which means they're committing that all their trials move to digital methods because that's more accessible by people. We're seeing a best of breed as well, but also ultimately a narrowing of architecture approaches so that these platforms can be properly adopted even in countries where it's very difficult currently to operate, because these are global companies. Everyone needs healthcare, everyone needs medicine. But it's a change in mindset. I think that's the most challenging that we face, because they have to look very hard at how they're set up. Looking at you, Ed. And really rethink, what is the future of medicine? How do we accelerate the R&D innovation curve meaningfully for everybody?
So, and this is interesting because you talked about all these interface points. How do you, I want to follow up with you on this one. How do you define the interface point? Like where you start and end in terms of your services, your technology. At that edge, you are going to be transacting processes, data, dollars, most likely, right? Whether there's an API that helps enable that or not, TBD. A lot of times there's not, which makes it painful. But even, I love that last comment on sort of, especially in trials when you're running them globally, that interface point might actually change even for the same trial depending on where you're actually operating it.
So this is a really, I think it's a very important point. In this economic environment, not all innovative companies are going to survive. And that's because not all business models are created equal. So I'll speak to our mission, which is to get all patients access to medicine. And the principle of that is that they have access across the world. So a platform methodology or mindset is critical. So the underlying bottom-up considerations on each of those touch points that you mentioned have to be extremely thoughtful, and you don't want to do everything. If we carried the load of every service that a Pfizer wanted to offer or that Google Fitbit would want to offer, we would go out of business. So being thoughtful about the patient interface, which is the most important thing. If you're sitting in Africa and you are 100 miles from a hospital, being thoughtful about a hospital or site interface, and being thoughtful about the sponsor interface is the 3 core areas of focus. Because we find that, again, we ask ourselves, what is the problem? The problem isn't with the human, it's not with the patient, it's with the system that collects the important information to make the medicine. And those are the 3 core pillars of the development of medicine that matter for our platform. And we believe that if we can apply those in the right configurations to therapeutic categories, which we have now for millions of patients in 60 countries and 40 languages, what we have learned is that you don't have to do everything. You can do enough to facilitate a better experience, and then you can work with others to do the rest. I think that we have seen people suffer, right? We've seen our colleagues and leading other companies perhaps suffer because we try to do everything and it's not intentional enough right now.
I want to follow up the same question to you, Ed, because I think talking from the B2B underlying tech backbone perspective, thank you both, versus building out digital solutions, for patients. How do you think about, what you're standing up and where interface points are, coming from the Pfizer perspective?
Yeah, I think interface means a lot of things to a lot of people, right? So, one of the things Hassan's kind of leaned in on, which I'm obviously real passionate about, which is not related to my business unit, but is something I think that's going to be critical in the future, is decentralized trials, right? So if you think about this, the ability to get trials to where the patients are versus what it's traditionally been, I think is going to be really powerful. And I think that there are many companies kind of leading from the front there. I think related to how pharma, I'll speak more at a pharma level than a Pfizer specific level, but I think as we begin to imagine that patients may want different types of interactions, different types of interfaces, different types of medicine, I think that the stewards of so much of health over the last 100 years have been pharmaceutical companies. They've innovated some of the most powerful life-saving solutions that we have. We just went through that over the last couple of years. And so I think getting the chance to be that steward of the next generation of digital medicine, for instance, like products that are going to be hugely impactful for patients, but are coming through a new modality, but through a trusted partner or through a trusted innovator. I think that's the part that excites me, because I don't know that you had companies of this scale 10 years ago leaning into digital medicine. Digital medicine may not have even been a thing 10 years ago. And so I think that's exciting. Not the least of which the fact that we're even doing a panel on this, and the fact that the companies being represented shows how rapidly this is maturing. And so getting back to your original question is I think there are so many multifactorial interfaces that will be possible now, and that we should lean into that, whether it be decentralized trials, whether it be digital medicine, whether it be, I think all of us on stage here have some form of wearable, which is kind of remarkable. That's new. And all of these things are going to start creating new possibilities that weren't there before.
So this has got me thinking a bit about the topic of data too, which of course, data's a new oil. We've all heard it too many times. But I think there's a real fundamental strategic question when it comes to data generally and then healthcare data specifically. And this is the serve one or serve many question as I like to think about it, where you serve one, you're going to have less data. You optimize around fewer customers, but you have a contained system. You can control the data. And in healthcare, you might be held to a regulatory constraint that might force you to this. Versus serve many in a world of more compute, that there's more value to that potentially, in theory. Of course, depends on the use case. I'd love for some reflections on this serve one versus serve many, and especially coming from the sort of B2B, back-end version versus some view that might be more, direct patient-facing. And Dave, you actually play both sides of it because you guys actually build some of the patient-facing apps too.
Well, maybe I'll start, and I think we're all going to have to address this one, if that's okay.
You can all weigh in.
Look, I think of it as like prevention versus treatment, honestly, because if we as people want to serve one patient at a time, and we think about their unique needs, we've lost what is the problem, the systemic problem, which is why is it that each drug costs $2 to $5 billion over 10 years? Why is it that only, there's a $320 billion affordability gap for medicines? Why is it that so few people get access to the life-changing therapies that, rightfully so, pharmaceutical companies have done such a wonderful job developing? So I think the root cause element here is really tied to not embracing the technological capabilities in healthcare. I was at the Galleon Foundation, and Bob Califf said something really funny. He says, we're awful. We are awful in healthcare at adopting technology. And so if we just think of it that way, Nate, for just a moment, in my view, that if we can do some of the root cause analysis and move beyond our orthodox methods to some extent together as partners, and we can reach more than one patient. We can reach them all.
Yeah, I love that answer. It's for us, it's what are you solving for? And I think this has come up in a lot of the conversations last night and this morning. When you think about the patient journey, right, and really the motivation for what we're solving for, there's a range of things. It could be a script to fill problem, right, and so patient access, and what percentage of the patients are actually getting the medicine once it's available. And then what digital interventions can we actually use to address those? So we have a data partnership with Claritas RX, right, where there's a significant amount of data that can come to really understand what is the patient doing with this therapy, and then how can we design a digital intervention to address that challenge? Where are the biggest friction points, right? If it's an EHR experience, right, managing the provider and the patient issue. One example of a partnership we have on data is with Lineate, right, where they have something like 1,700 healthcare organizations globally to manage data interoperability and access. And so that allows for scale and speed of access to data at the right point. But critically, we're not going and trying to integrate all data from all source points and all inputs. We're solving for what is the patient need for this particular therapy to really drive a meaningful change in their holistic outcome. So.
Okay, sorry, I want to double down on this one for a second.
Can I build on that, but that's okay.
Oh, please.
So Google's so big, we've got the luxury of doing both, right? Like, so on the cloud side, for example, we build platforms that you can put tons of data into. It's amazing ML that can make some really cool insights out of that. And then in my world, and even there, you can see like the generic use case, which is like, Fitbit wearable for everybody. The Fitbit heart study, 450,000 people, one of the largest trials of its kind. But then we've partnered with folks in India, for example, where we're working on some cardiac rehab. Folks get discharged from the hospital. Very specific use case. You've had a heart condition, you're going home, you're anxious, we're helping you with your recovery. And there we've partnered with a company that takes all of the data from the wearable, takes data from other devices and from patient-reported like symptoms, things like that, creates dashboards for the clinicians, creates an app for the patients to interact with, provides them YouTube videos and stuff like that to engage, built on Google Cloud. So bringing all the different parts of Google with a partner in a very specific targeted use case, right? So it depends on the situation, but you don't have to choose necessarily. I think in the right sort of context, each one is powerful.
Can both of you reflect for a minute on the architectural implications because even just handling the PHI versus having to dip into models where you can't. I mean, we've built solutions where we had to firewall it and actually partner out just to get it outside of the customer. So the partnership and architecture were so linked to actually regulatory and compliance concerns with the products we were putting together. I'm curious if you've had similar experiences.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So we're actually built on Google Cloud, and so a lot of the value that comes from that underlying infrastructure is right there for us to take advantage of. And then the way to think about how we've solved that challenge is to have this layer of compliance that is fundamentally built into our infrastructure. So every line of code that we have is built under a quality management system, 13485, and we solve for quality and regulatory and privacy and security to manage for those high-risk use cases and for things like PII, PHI. But it comes with, at least in our hands, we've believed that we needed to solve for the highest risk first and build the entire infrastructure. So taking advantage of the core and then building our core microservices on top of that, solving for the most challenging solution. And then we can kind of serve the need across, they might be unregulated solutions at first, MVPs that get you quickly to market. And then you kind of stage up from that in versions 1, 2, and 3 that really drive more value with the patient. And already you've solved for the challenge of that, whether it's geographic expansion in a regulatory context or really a value expansion, so to speak. So you're driving a new behavior in the patient that actually introduces more risk and thus a higher classification that's already very quick to kind of integrate into the system. So.
Anything you want to add?
I'm good.
A data question to you on serving one versus serving many.
Punt.
Okay, we're going back to you though. So for those less aware with the groups here, the two on that side represent giant companies. The two on this side represent growth companies. To the big company crew, how do you think about selecting your partners? What are the types of things that you consider when you are looking at partners to stand up health tech solutions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, and again, this is a personal view, but I think it's accurate. These aren't companies; these are people. They're collections of people, right? Like the biggest companies in the world are still led by a couple of exceptional leaders. And some of the most innovative startups are led by a couple of exceptional leaders. And so when you're trying to think of what's probably the single most important factor to choosing a partner, it's the people running that company and what their specific vision is. I think the idea of creating this filter mechanism and say, no, if a company's not 1,000 people, they're not the right partner. Or if they haven't done it 100 times before, they're not the right partner. At least in the field of digital medicine, no one's done it 100 times. No one's done it even 4 times. And so it's about saying the filter that we should put on this is, are these people high integrity? Are they the right people? Do they know about this? And do they care about the stakeholders? And I use that intentionally because lots of times it's not just the patient. Sometimes it's also the caregiver. Sometimes it's the child, sometimes it's the parent, and that's just in one use case. And so to me, I think the single most important factor, although it's a soft factor, but I do think it is you are partnering with people, and you need to believe that they are as committed to impacting the lives of people and patients as you are.
Yeah, I'll plus one to that, for sure. And you have to have sort of passion on both sides. It can be, hey, we'll follow up in 3 weeks and nothing happens and months have gone by, that sort of thing. And people who are intentional about what they're doing and care about patients, but also understand the complexity of the ecosystem and can actually take what you're offering and deploy it. I think for me personally, Google's a wonderful place, and we have a ton of tools, and we have not just Fitbit, but cloud, YouTube, so many other resources, search, maps, etc. It's a little bit like a hardware store, and they have all these great things, and you have screws, and you have boards, and then somebody's like, I want a table. I'm like, we have all these things, you can go build a table. Like, no, but I just want the table. I don't want your tools. And taking these consumer tools, or sometimes clouds, enterprise tools, and then applying them to a very specific use case, like the cardiac rehabilitation, you need a partner who understands both sides, who understands the needs of patients, doctors, the administrators who might be paying for it, but then also what our capabilities and limitations are. You can use the cloud, you can use YouTube, you can use Fitbit, but if you need us to make a very bespoke thing on Fitbit for your solution, like, I'm sorry, like, we're not going to do that for 3,000 people. Like, that's just not going to happen. And so being able to sort of work with us and then accelerate that impact, like, we're passionate. Like, I will spend time working with this small startup so that we reach more people and we create those models that then lead to scale in other sort of areas of, but if they can't keep up and sort of understand and meet us where we're at, it's going to be very hard to have that relationship.
Great. So to the growth companies, it's a different question. The growth companies, this is about, I mean, you're in a different position. You got to sell, you got to grow. So how do you think about scalability, sustainability of the business, and positioning yourself both from a tech and business model perspective when you consider partnerships? Customers, I'm going to take customers off the table. You asked that question before. Customers off the table. This is through a partnership question to enable your long-term growth.
I'm not a technologist. I'm a life science person, right? So for me, when I think about partners, I think about what is the economic value that we are creating together in the dynamics of the drug value chain. And if I believe, as a leader and colleagues with these people, we are changing how healthcare is made. And you have to, though, appreciate and understand, like, what are you doing, right, together? What is the intrinsic value that you can measure and track and contract on and create together? And so partners for me have to be value generating, revenue generating. It's not a marketing partner, right? It's not a thought partner. And when you look at it that way, in my experience, you go from 100 opportunities to 3. And so there's not that many, actually, that we have found that can really scale this stuff. The second thing I would say is the convergence of technology and science is real. There is a reason it's called biotechnology. Technology is used in science, and it's very surprising to me, having worked in pharma most of my life in life sciences, that people don't actually see that very clearly. So also finding partners that understand that, they understand the dynamics of that, make it a lot easier and a lot faster to innovate together and see revenue, right? To see growth, to see impact to patients.
And Dave, you are closing us out, so maybe end on a positive note here.
So yeah, I think there's 2 components to the answer for us. One is the business model component that you're talking about, and the other is really the soft criteria that you raised, Ed. On the business model side, I'm a big believer in aligning value creation and value consumption. And so, just as San said, there's going to be a small group of best-of-breed players who can really drive incremental and differentiated value, that share of value is distributed across those partners and ultimately for the patient, right? Let's not forget that we're talking about revenue, but it's all from the lens of what is actually going to change in the patient's experience and the patient's life. So that's part one, I think, aligning value creation and consumption in a fair way, in a way that's demonstrated by the data. And then the second, on the soft side, right? It's actually saying who has the ambition to do something, right? And we do this with all of our partners, and you mentioned this, Kapil, that really if you don't hear from somebody for 2 weeks, that's it. Go to the next partner. But it's the orientation to drive change. That there's tech stacks. There's all sorts of solutions that you could pair with, but ultimately it's a change management challenge that is going to require people first and processes and technology second. So you find the champions, the motivation is likely the passion to change patients' lives and ultimately drive that change.
Awesome. Well, thank you all.
Great.
These 40 minutes have been great. It's been great hanging out over the last day. And thank you all for coming.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.